Everyone, it's 7 o'clock, and I'm going to call the February 18th session of the Town Council to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syock.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. Welcome. We start our evening, as we always do, with a Pledge of Allegiance, and this evening I'd like to invite Jordan Okonkwo up to lead our pledge. Jordan, come on up. Jordan is a senior at Los Gatos High School. She serves on our Los Gatos Youth Commission. She is also, she's a very interesting woman. I was talking to her a bit. She was a competitive diver, and I was imagining scuba diving. I was like, how did you do that? It's like, no, jump off the diving board, and it's like, oh, got it. So 3 meter springboard and a competitive diver, and she's gone to like actual real competitions. But she's also helped out with being a teaching assistant at Fisher in the cooking class. She said she got stuck in baking. She's not really a baker, didn't like the cleanup. But more importantly to me, or more interesting to me, she has participated twice in Los Gatos High School's mock trial competition. And being a trial lawyer and having another trial lawyer sitting up here, I thought, well, that's really interesting. Did you like it? Yes. She wants to become a lawyer. Her father is a district attorney in the Santa Clara County DA's office, and her mom works for the National Labor Relations Board. And before I have her say the pledge, I'm just going to go out of character for a moment and take this opportunity to say that she wants to be a lawyer, and working in the DA's office and being a prosecutor, it's a good time to remind everyone how important it is to administer justice fairly under our law and Constitution. So with that, Jordan?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, and let's have a hand for Jordan. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Jordan. Have a good evening. Next item on our agenda is our closed session report. Mr.
Yes.
Schultz?
Good evening. Prior to tonight's council session, council met in closed session to discuss real property negotiations. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
And council and manager matters. This is the opportunity for members of the council. All of us serve on regional and local and Los Gatos different boards and commissions where we discuss varying issues of interest to other council members and of interest to the public, and this is our chance to report out on those issues that are under discussion. So does anyone have something to report this evening? Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the West Valley Clean Water Board meeting, and basically the more interesting things will be coming forward because we have a mandated stormwater compliance moving forward, and the town of Los Gatos is on schedule. Attended the West Valley Solid Waste meeting, and on that one, again, we should soon, maybe the next meeting, be coming forward with an agreement for a payment to the West Valley Collection Recycling because of their increased recycling cost. Attended the West Valley Sanitation District Board meeting. That meeting, the agenda items were over very quickly, but we had probably an hour closed session on pending litigation. And lastly, I attended the Live Oak Adult Daycare Open House. I feel that that is very important because we have an increasing number of seniors in our community, and Live Oak could provide services important to them.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. So on February 5th, I attended part of the LAFCO meeting, and then I had to rush to the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee. On February 12th, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board met, and we announced 2 more contracts for construction and operation of new renewable energy facilities to provide electricity for our local communities. One is a new geothermal plant near Mammoth Lakes in California. The second adds new solar and energy storage capacity to a Silicon Valley Clean Energy solar plant in Kings County, California. This brings the number of new renewable energy facilities being built for Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority to 4, totaling over 900,000 megawatt hours of energy per year. We also received a clean audit report, and more importantly, that was the last item we needed to, last requirement we needed to get through to get a credit rating. So now we should be getting a credit rating from Moody's shortly. On February 6th, I attended Spurs Transit Agency Board Members Workshop in San Francisco. It was interesting. I ended up meeting board members from BART, SFMTA, AC Transit, and some others. Also on February 6th, I rushed back for the VTA Government and Audit Committee, where we made our work plan for the coming months to work through recommendations by a governance consultant that were forwarded by the board. The board of directors met afterwards, where we passed the climate emergency resolution, a climate emergency resolution, and then the board chair assigned the committee in which I chair, Congestion Management, to work through the details of the climate action plan, so I'm looking forward to that. Also, on February 10th, the Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee met to discuss our coming work for receiving presentations and reviewing applications for allocations for the Community Development Block Grant funds. And the presentations are going to be in the middle of March, and then towards the end of March, we're going to be returning to give our development recommendations to the supervisors, or develop them, and they will then go on to the supervisors. On the 12th of February, I also attended the Community Development Advisory Committee, where I think I was elected chair, if I remember correctly. We reviewed a proposal for 4 units at 11 units per acre density that exceeded max FAR because there were not enough, they were not attached, but were located within walking distance to Fisher and Van Meter, so we'll see where that project goes from there. Feedback was given from Councilmember Sayak was there with us also, and 2 of the planning commissioners. On February 14th, I attended the Joint Venture Silicon Valley State of the Valley conference session they had, and the big idea they were pushing was the idea of mixed use along boulevards to accommodate the needed 150,000 housing units that we need to build to catch up with all the job creation that's been going on. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Sayak? I attended the ABAG General Assembly, which was quite interesting. And there was a very interesting panel. For those of you that follow state housing and transportation bills, it's a panel of Senator Jim Bell, Senator Scott Wiener, and David Chu, Assemblyman David Chu, who are authors of lots of legislation surrounding housing. SB 50, which is Scott Wiener's idea to put more dense and taller housing along transit corridors, essentially. SB 50 had just been defeated, and Senator Wiener's message to the assembled local officials was, it's a bump in the road and I will be back with not 1 but 2 more bills, one a different version of SB 50 and one generally described as a zoning reform bill. So that is going to be pursued relentlessly by Senator Wiener, and he had an interesting argument for it, backed by data, along with Mr. Chu had an interesting argument for it as well. And different members of the Assembly thought different things about it, but those bills are definitely coming back. We will see them again. For our purposes in Los Gatos, it will matter because as we look at our general plan update, and Councilwoman Sayak and I have asked everyone, I know there's not a lot of you here, but those of you that might be watching, we are going to get a very high regional housing needs allocation for Los Gatos in the coming year. The ABAG will receive their quote number, unquote, their general number of housing units needed for the area in April. And then they will go through the process that Ms. Pavetti is participating in of determining how they will decide who gets assigned what kind of number. We can expect that our numbers will be very high. When the Southern California Association of Governments went through this process, I believe their numbers went up by something on the order of 600%. So we can expect much the same, and we should be planning for a large number of units that we are going to be responsible for coming up in the next housing cycle. With that, Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you. Well, on the theme of housing, let me announce that on Wednesday, February 26th, our Planning Commission will consider the proposed land use alternative for the general plan update, which does anticipate at least 2,000 new housing units for the town of Los Gatos. So this is a public hearing. The public is invited to attend and participate. The Planning Commission's recommendation would then come to Town Council for a full public hearing and discussion. And this is really foundational in terms of what the next steps will be for our general plan and determining the details of how we're going to achieve those housing numbers. Also, next week, on Tuesday, the 25th of February, we are holding a community meeting, and everyone's invited at 7 p.m. in these chambers regarding the proposed Highway 17 bicycle and pedestrian overcross. We're looking at doing a financial feasibility study, and so we want the public's ideas in terms of where and how we might be able to facilitate this crossing. Third, we are starting our first Citizens Police Academy. Applications are now being accepted for residents and others within Montecito and Los Gatos, and we're encouraging folks to sign up. It's a great way to get behind the scenes around law enforcement and understand how and why we do certain things within the town. It is a program that starts on the 19th of March and runs through the 21st of May, so we're interested and very excited to be offering this. And then finally, we have started our recruitments for our adult and youth commissions. Youth commission applications are due on May 1st, and adult applications are due on May 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti. Which brings us to our consent calendar. Consent calendar consists of items that are generally deemed to be not controversial and can be passed in a single motion. Tonight we have 7 items on the calendar. Before I ask for a motion, Ms. Spector, do you have a statement?
Yes, when we get to the motion, I will be agreeing to the consent calendar with the exception of a no on 3.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
So I move to approve items 1 through 7.
Seconded. All in favor? Aye. And Ms. Spector voting no on item 3. I do not have any cards for verbal communications. If you'd like to talk to us about something that is not on our agenda tonight, now is the time to do that. Seeing no one, we are going to move to item number 8, which is our mid-year budget performance report. Ms.
Thank
Pavetti.
you, Mayor. Thank you. The purpose of the mid-year budget report is really a check-in to make sure that we are on track and that our expenditures and revenues are tracking as we would expect, being at the midpoint of the year. We typically monitor our revenues and expenditures. It's something that we do on an ongoing basis, and we present this status report to you so you can get a sense as to where we are. In general, we're finding that revenues are tracking very well. Actually, they're exceeding our budgeted amounts, so we are proposing modifications to increase the revenue adjustments for property and sales tax, and this is based on recent information from our own tax assessor. The staff was at a meeting as recently as last Friday where they received updated information, as well as from our independent sales tax consultant. In terms of expenditures, we're tracking at about 46% of the adopted budget. So again, we're on track there. And there are some recommendations for minor adjustments to the budget, so that way we can continue to provide excellent services to our residents. As a reminder, we will be considering the proposed budget in May. That document will have very detailed financial analysis regarding a lot of different line items and other specific funds. So stay tuned if you're interested in more detailed information. This evening with me, I have Assistant Town Director Arn Andrews. He and I are available to answer general questions regarding the mid-year report. Director Conway is here, our finance director, to answer specific number questions, and then representatives of our various departments are here if you have questions about specific adjustments. With that, we're available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Ms. Spector.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Two questions, and this has to do with the staff's recommendation. One is that the council, receive the mid-year budget performance, and I see that as like a passive thing. We acknowledge that we have received it. And then on the authorizing budget adjustments, I'm just confirming that those are the ones on page 13. So I just
Pages
wanted-
15.
15.
15.
So I just want to clarify that that is what we are being asked to do this evening.
Yes, that's correct. So you will be receiving the report. It is important that you, as our elected body, receive this financial report. And the mid-year adjustments start on page 13, and they continue on page 14 with descriptions that follow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, seeing none. I don't have any cards. Gone. Close the public portion of the meeting and look to the council for comments and/or a motion. All right, seeing no comments or a motion, I'm just going to go ahead and make a motion. That my motion is that we receive and recognize the fiscal mid-year budget performance report, July 1, 2019 through December 31st, 2019, and authorize the budget adjustments that have been recommended in attachment 1, which is the budget performance report, as Ms. Pravetti said, beginning on 13 and going through 14.
Second the motion.
There's a second. Any discussion on the motion? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to be supporting the motion. I know that we received community input on this agenda item with some critiques, and then we have today received staff's reply to those critiques. Based upon the information I have, which is why I'm going to be supporting the motion, those issues that were raised do not impact what we're being asked to do, which is receive the document and then authorize the recommended changes.
Any other comments before I call the question? And Ms. Spector, you're referring to the desk item that we received this evening, correct?
I am.
Okay. Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you for being present, everyone. We'll now move to item 9, which is a discussion of basically vehicle miles traveled and setting thresholds for the town with respect to that. So I see some, there we go. Hello. You introduce yourself and your colleague and have at it.
I believe Ying Smith is going to actually start us.
Ms. Smith, you're
It's
going to
gonna be
start
a
first.
little
There
bit
he
of
is,
a-
ready to go.
It's a tag team,
okay.
so this is going
Ms.
to be
Smith, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Ying Smith, Transportation and Mobility Manager. And while we're here, let's introduce Dan Rubens from Fair & Pierce Associates. And Fair & Pierce being hired to assist the town in this process of the VMT transition per the CEQA guidelines. So this is one of the decision points in the CEQA transportation analysis transition. The background information is included in the staff report as well as the attachments. So tonight we're going to provide an overview of the work and and be ready to answer your questions, and we do have a recommendation in front of you for your consideration. So with that, I'm going to let Dan help us get started.
Thank you, Ying. Mayor, council members, good evening. So my task this afternoon or evening is to provide some technical background for this decision or the options that Ying will be presenting a little bit later in this presentation and is put forward in the staff report. And I thought it'd be good just to start with Senate Bill 743 was signed into law in 2013 by Governor Brown, and its legislative intent does change how we will evaluate transportation for environmental impacts. And that purpose, or that change, is to align with state goals around greenhouse gas reduction, active transportation, and infill development. What this really means is that we will be moving from evaluating the impacts to a driver to measuring the effects of impacts of driving, right? So what that means is it does mean we will change from using vehicle level of service as the way to identify environmental impacts and use vehicle miles traveled. It will, there are a few other considerations in Senate Bill 743 that will look at active transportation and transit, but it does not change how you do your general plan evaluation, your CMP, your congestion management program evaluations, all of your other kind of entitlement review. It doesn't change those sorts of things. It does not also change the expectation of how you will determine what an adequate environmental analysis is. So the same disclosure process that you're familiar with in the past is the same process now. It's just a matter of changing the transportation metric. So the legislative intent really set us in a certain direction, from the state perspective. A part of that legislation that was passed in 2013 changed how, or tasked OPR, the Office of Planning and Research, with updating the CEQA guidelines. And those updates, CEQA statutory law, are the requirements for which we evaluate a transportation project or a land use project's effect on the environment. So in this graphic here, you can see the legislative intent is kind of that first level that defines our direction. The CEQA guidelines were updated in 2018. It establishes the requirements of an adequate environmental analysis, and in December of 2018, OPR also provided their advice on what would be an approach to environmental analysis. The town council here ultimately has the discretion of setting its own thresholds. So there's really, we will be working with Ying and staff on providing a working documentation, substantial evidence, for 4 main topics to help you with your decision making. They're going to relate to the VMT metric, the method, the threshold, and the mitigation. So 4 main topics. And I just wanted to kind of highlight one for now so that it will help with the context that Ying will present on the options. So for the threshold setting options, there's really 4 kind of main options. The first 2 are the town council considering statewide goals, adopting OPR's advisory thresholds, which there's already documentation provided. It's, if you're familiar with some of the thresholds that have been talked about, 15% below existing conditions. So that's the first threshold, and that's what option 1 that Ying will show is. There's a variant on that uses other kind of, OPR is one state agency. There's other state agencies that have presented other thresholds that look at greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, and energy consumption. So California Air Resources Board, for example, has another % threshold. So those are the first 2 options. The third option, which will be the second one that Ying presents, is on using your local town goals, where you establish under a future condition, where you say our land use and transportation network is specified in our general plan. From that, you have a VMT allocation, right? So you would establish a future VMT allocation. So that's the second option that Ying will present. And then the third option, or the fourth one here, is a variant on the third option. It is establishing baseline VMT. So VMT for today. If you chose to establish a threshold, we're not going to increase VMT in our community from this day forward. That's what the fourth option is. So I just wanted to highlight a term that is often, or a part of the OPR guidance that's been presented or is quoted quite often. It's the OPR recommendation that a per capita or per employee VMT that's 15% below existing development may be considered a reasonable threshold. Pretty compact sentence, but within that, there's several decisions for the town council to make. Ultimately, as the lead agency, you are the one recommending the threshold. You're defining the metric, the per capita VMT, the percent reduction, the threshold, and what it's relative to, right? So a percent relative to something to define a threshold. So those are things that we'll come back after the detailed documentation package and present options, some considerations for those options, and you can ultimately select the threshold that you believe is appropriate for your local community values. So Los Gatos is located, on the edge of a pretty large urban area. Has a suburban land use context and some transit, but not a lot. And what that means is when you look at vehicle miles traveled, that on average, Los Gatos tends to generate more VMT than, say, downtown San Francisco, for just complete contrast, where you have more density and diversity of land uses, you have BART and many other transportation modes to select from. So Los Gatos, in its local context, would, by just where it is, generate more VMT. And I think probably an example would help to illustrate this. So if we look at the next slide, we have two VMT metrics here. The first on the left is a home VMT per resident, and then on the right is work VMT per worker. So we focus just first on home VMT per resident. The bars are representing the amount of VMT for a given geographic area. On the very far left, it's the entire Bay Area. The second from the left is the county. Los Gatos is next, and then a couple kind of comparable or adjacent communities, Campbell, Montezurino, and Saratoga. And what you'll see is Los Gatos, the third from the left, is generating more VMT on average than the Bay Area region and the county. So if we take the OPR threshold of 15% below existing conditions, in this case, if we're using the county-wide average as that basis, that horizontal red line would be the threshold. So you can see where, to be less than significant, you would need to go quite a ways down, from 17.3 down to 11.3 for the residents, right? And OPR is presenting screening criteria. So if you use their 15% threshold, you're starting at 17. To get below 15%, you need to get down to the 11.3. So if you don't screen out, you need to do more complete analysis, perhaps. Same kind of idea for workers. You can see that Los Gatos is still above potentially that 15% threshold for the county-wide. So to kind of round things out, I wanted to mention, because the metric, the threshold, the method, and mitigation are all kind of interrelated. The town of Los Gatos, or VMT itself, is an accessibility metric, right? It's the land use and transportation network and where you're located that defines how much VMT you typically will generate. If you're in a place that's dispersed land uses, you'll generate more VMT than compact land uses in a downtown. Yet the There's 3 items that Ying highlighted in her staff report about how you can influence your VMT. And the first kind of grouping, where you have the greatest influence or have the most effect on VMT, are your regional infrastructure, so your transportation system, your regional transportation system, your regional policies, land use transportation policies, and where you're located. So all of those have a direct effect on, and the most effect on how much VMT you can generate. Next is the site design. So when you start to actually get to a specific parcel or group of parcels, how you connect your bike, your transit, and pedestrian facilities, those all have an influence on your the amount of VMT you can generate. And then finally, there's the people, the type of business that's in the building or residents that are in the building have some effect. And for the case of perhaps office projects, you can use transportation demand management to kind of provide additional transportation options that could reduce VMT. While you can be very specific about it, it's on a building or group of buildings. So its influence on VMT is less.
Thank you. The last few slides really set up the background leading to the recommendation. So we want to summarize our considerations in going in why we present this recommendation to you. Our considerations focus on the effectiveness of the TDM measures and the statewide VMT trend, as well as whether the 15% reduction threshold is realistic in the local setting. So the CEQA guidelines does give the lead agency the discretion. It states that the lead agencies can choose a threshold that is different if it's backed by substantial evidence and the corresponding analysis of VMT effects is adequate and complete. So with the considerations and the work we have done so far, we're narrowing the options down to 2. So we start with the 4 options agencies can consider. We think this 2 can, first, the threshold decision will inform the other 3 metrics, the metrics, method, and mitigation measures. And based on that, we narrow this 2. We believe both of them are reasonable for the town to consider. The first option is to rely on the OPR's technical advisories thresholds, the typical 15% reduction. The second one is to set the thresholds consistent with the general plan future year VMT projections. So the next 2 slides are basically the same table as what is included in the staff report. It shows a comparison of those 2 in the 4 subject areas, the 4 decisions you would need to make. And then in addition to the 4, we also want to highlight how this threshold decision may tie to the general plan update, as well as the CEQA analysis for future development projects. So choosing between the 2 options, there's really no right or wrong answer. So that's what we really want to emphasize, that both of them are feasible. The question is, which one is more appropriate for the local setting? So that's what drives our recommendation. The staff recommendation is choose option 2, set thresholds consistent with the general plan future year VMT projections. We summarize the considerations as well as the benefits. Just in summary, because our land use setting, because the mature land use pattern, and also because the general plan doesn't anticipate the so-called game changer type of developments. Those are the ones that really shift the regional travel pattern, not just the travel pattern within Los Gatos, but really affects the entire region. We don't anticipate that type of developments included in the general plan. So for that reason, we're recommending option 2. One of the benefits of choosing this option is to allow the town to take advantage of the CEQA streamlining provision. To wrap up, Depending on the council's decision this evening, as well as your direction, staff and Fan Peer will continue to prepare the necessary technical work to prepare the analysis for you. You will return with the work, and then you get to review the substantial evidence before you make a decision. The final deliverable is the town's own transportation analysis policy and guidelines. And it has to be in compliance with the CEQA guidelines. So also another consideration in the future is to update the town's local transportation analysis policies. So that wraps up our presentation, and town staff as well as Fan Peer staff will be here to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ms. Sayak, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Actually, I have several questions, if that's okay. So I appreciate how you've narrowed it down to 2. If we could just take a step back. So on page 4, there's actually 4 options for setting VMT. If you could just explain why you and staff eliminated 2 and 4, which was threshold consistent with lead agency, air quality, so the Air Resources Board, and then the setting thresholds based on baseline.
So I think I will let Dan start on this one. He's more knowledgeable on those, the pros and cons of those options.
Yeah, so the first two options are very similar. It's a matter of the percent that you would apply. So OPR has already gone through the effort of creating the substantial evidence for the 15%. So that's why option 1 was presented. For option 2, which is the third bullet, that is one where, in thinking about the local context of...
Actually, I could just clarify. I'm looking, there were 4 options first highlighted, and one was OPR's 15%.
Yes.
And then you mentioned Air Resources Board. And
Yep.
so what was their threshold criteria?
That's the second bullet, so it would be a 16.8%.
Okay, so it's larger. Okay. And then the fourth one where you set it on baseline.
Yeah, so that it depends on what you define for your VMT metric. It could be as kind of rigorous as a 0% threshold, no change in the VMT on the roadway system, to a VMT metric that is efficiency metric, so VMT per service population, so an average. You define what that is for your community, and you stay at least at that average or better.
Okay. And so between the third and the fourth then, where we're looking at specific characteristics of our neighborhood, is it in your opinion that option 2, which is the third bullet, is something that we could actually measure more easily?
All of these have the equal challenge of measure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if I can, just one other, and then I'll defer to others. In one of your slides, you had mentioned, I think it was home VMT versus work VMT. Mm-hmm. Could you just explain what the difference is?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So home VMT is tracking all the trips that are coming to and from your house. So that would be trips that are going to work, that's your trips going to shopping, to recreation, the library, and so on. So that's what the home VMT is, so that's the residential VMT. The work VMT is your commute trip. It is going to and from work. So you wake up in the morning, you drive to work, that part of the VMT is included. Yeah, so it's a portion of your overall travel.
So would we be choosing between the two, or future projects would have an analysis that looks at both?
Yes, it depends on the land use. So if you're considering using screening, which OPR is, and you're evaluating a residential project, you would use the home VMT.
Oh, I see. Versus a business or commercial, we would look at work VMT.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Mr. Rennie?
First question, so for the purpose of setting our metrics and our thresholds, we're only talking about miles driven inside Los Gatos, correct?
No. The nature of vehicle miles traveled, it actually does leave the town of Los Gatos, and we would be capturing that travel. So it could be to your adjacent community of Campbell. It could be to Sacramento. So we would be including all of that VMT in the
So
calculation.
that seems inconsistent from last time we had this conversation. There was, I know we talked about, there is a regional VMT, but we were going to be focused, our metrics would be focused on only our local driven miles.
Okay, if I can, I think we are on the same page. So yes, we would be tracking the trips that has at least one end within Los Gatos. So there may be some pass-by trips, like go from San Francisco to Santa Cruz, and if they don't make a stop in Los Gatos, those are not the trips we need to worry about in this analysis. So will be all the trips with at least one end within the town limits,
So
and which is consistent with what we present on this chart.
So let me give an example then. So let's say we have a housing project that comes to us, and I would think any housing project is potentially going to reduce vehicle miles traveled because most of the jobs are closer here than they are, say, in Los Baños or even Morgan Hill or Gilroy. So the vehicle miles traveled would be a reduction regionally. They're going to start here, but we're comparing them to miles that didn't start here and didn't even pass through maybe, but they were potentially going to the same place in Mountain View, for example. Is it going to say then that's a good idea for us to allow this housing development to occur? Would that, our metrics allow that to occur?
Yes, yeah, and I think I'll just highlight a few things that we will spend some time in the documentation to present to you. Is VMT that's baseline today, right? So you have a certain kind of rate, and that's what these numbers are. Under a cumulative condition, where Town of Los Gatos land use increases and other communities' land uses change, these rates could change. You know, if you build a lot more housing, your rates might go up. If you build more office or commercial development, they might go down. So we would be looking at that change you're describing as a part of helping to set the threshold.
So if I go in one of your slides, oh, it's this one here actually, you're showing Los Gatos as being higher than the average in the county, well, higher than most anybody else there. If we build more housing here, that number's going to go up. We're going to be adding vehicle miles traveled from Los Gatos, but we may be reducing them other places. So we're making ourselves look worse, but we're doing good for the region as a whole. So how does that fit into this? Because I think you were saying, well, we should look for trying to reduce our 17.3, when in fact we'd be adding to our 17.3.
Yeah. This is something we will spend a little bit of time in the metrics section of the documentation. What we've been presenting and primarily talking about is a VMT efficiency metric, so it's a generation rate, VMT generation rate. There is also looking at all the VMT on the roadway system and how that might change. And that metric is what's referred to as total VMT. And with your example of land use changes, you would get a better sense of what the total change is on the roadway system.
Could you go to slide 11, please? It's okay if I keep asking questions. So,
Unless you have 800.
well, I was going to probably ask one more and then
Okay.
give a break. So the first bullet here says that project-specific TDM measures have limited townwide VMT reduction potential. What does that mean?
Yeah, so TDM is typically applied to one project, one building or a group of buildings. So it has limited effect in changing your overall citywide or townwide VMT. So it's just, it's applied to a very small portion of your VMT. So that's why it has a limited effect, a limited scope.
Maybe we can add an example, like a TDM measure could be you improve the sidewalk, like or the crosswalk across the street, and that can be a project-specific mitigation measure. But a project in that scale will have very little impact on the overall VMT at the town level or at the regional level. So they are really good projects, but the overall impact is relatively small. Especially when you compare if our goal is to reduce 15%. That's a pretty ambitious goal compared to the project-specific smaller improvements.
So I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand why you put this bullet up there. What is it? What's the point of telling us that?
I think along with the staff report, we want to put a scale on some of the VMT mitigation actions. There are really good projects, regional policy, investment infrastructure, and then further down to the more TDM measures. We want to put a scale to it so they're not all created equal. And also when we look at the 15%, how many more we need to do to get to that point. So that's the idea of putting it out there.
I'm going to take a break. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask my questions unless Vice Mayor has any. Okay. Foundational question. What we're trying to determine tonight is what our threshold will be. And the threshold is the threshold at which either there is an impact for CEQA purposes or there's no impact for CEQA purposes, right? So the 15% below existing, the only thing that means is that if there's a CEQA analysis, if you meet the 15%, there's no, or whatever, you're 15% under, there's no impact. If you're over it, there's an impact. Okay. So the mitigation measures we're talking about, if you can go to your little pyramid slide, wherever it is. Yeah. So those are, what you're showing us there are just means of getting to whatever the threshold that we set. Okay. So when we see at the very top where it doesn't have that much effect, Mr. Rennie was asking you about transit demand management. So if I have a mixed-use development and I've got housing and I give everybody a transit pass, my TDM maybe takes my tenants out of their car, but not necessarily, as you pointed out in the staff report. So that doesn't have a huge potential for mitigation, correct? So that's why you're showing us that stat? Okay. All right, so now two substantive questions, and I don't know who I asked this of. You gave us information both in the staff report and in the slides about our geographic condition, our lack of transit, or whatever it is, and indicated that we should not be very aspirational for our threshold because of our circumstances, that we're already car-centric and that we obviously produce a bunch of cars. So my question actually goes to, well, I'm going to save my comment for later, but all right, so we're in the midst of a general plan update. Couldn't we change our general plan to allow for more types of development that would generate less VMT mixed use, blah-de-blah, have them do a transit, put in our transit part of our general plan? Couldn't the way we develop our general plan affect the analysis that you've given us that means you're asking us to choose option 2?
I will start and Dan can help us out here. Yeah, that's the reason why we want to tie this effort with the general plan update. So in the process, the council can also review the general plan land use and other transportation investment to see how far the town can go to reduce VMT. And that way we run through the numbers so we know where we are. We could be at 15%, we could be at 15.5%, right? We're not asking you to establish that. We're asking you to decide on the approach, how we're going to go about doing it. And our recommendation is to do our own analysis and see what can be accomplished in terms of the percentage of reduction from the baseline.
Okay, but the general plan and, for example, the alternative land uses that are going to be under consideration by the Planning Commission could affect these various things on here: location efficiency, site design, policies, etc. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So that would change how we view where we might want to set the threshold from what's being suggested. It's basically 0 and figure it out versus 15% under. It's kind of my shorthand for it, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, I'm going to stop for now. Ms. Sayak.
So of the two different options you have, is there an ability to look at the 15% reduction of our community's VMTs, or is there any option of helping to reduce the regional VMT that apparently somebody's looking at, the total VMTs in the region?
Yes, there is. And
Okay.
who's looking at the regional VMT? That's MTC, as a part of the
Right.
Regional Transportation Plan, SCS.
So between the two options that are in front of us, which one has more of an effect on the regional VMT versus our individual VMT? And the reason why I'm asking is, if you look at your pyramid, and I agree with you that the regional policies will do much more in reducing emissions in the Bay Area versus the individual things that are within our control. So shouldn't we go for doing what's best for the environment and look at how we bring down 15% reduction to the regional?
I think I'm following you. Yes, I think it's very possible you could end up with the same outcome with either one of these. I think
Would any be in conflict, I guess, is the question then? By looking at what's 15% just for Los Gatos, could we be, in essence, not working within the total VMTs that's needed for the region?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to work through those numbers to know.
Okay.
So I couldn't give you the answer right now. I think the contrast between option 1 and 2 is option 1, you're going project by project, so parcel by parcel, through your analysis, the screening process. Whereas in option 2, you're looking at your entire community.
Okay.
And, while you're doing your general plan update, thinking about all of your policies and establishing your VMT threshold. And from that, you can really think about mitigation measures. Maybe it is land use changes in your general plan or a different type of transportation network. VMT, it starts to make a lot more sense to look at kind of town-wide VMT mitigation measures or region-wide mitigation measures.
Okay, so then if I hear, what I'm hearing then is if we wanted to be bold, then option 2 really allows us to do that because it's working in conjunction with the general plan update versus the project specific in option 1.
Either one would have to consider your general plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So just to follow up on that, you're not setting a specific threshold this evening. So it's not a decision whether we want to be bold or be really contributing to the state's VMT reduction. That's not the decision you're making. You're making the decision to help guide us to point to the approach so we can focus our energy in doing the analysis. So yes, any reduction the town can accomplish in the near term and long term will help the state, the region and state in achieving the VMT reduction and GHG reduction goals. The more individual cities and agencies can do, the more closer we are in meeting those goals. But your decision is maybe a little bit still on the technical side today, rather than saying the actual threshold you can agree on. So it's that difference.
Ms. Spector.
Thank you. I don't know who I'm going to be asking, so I'll just say it. I want you to assume for this question that the General Plan Advisory Committee is going to be making recommendations to intensify land uses along major streets, and I'll just make major streets up. Lark, the Boulevard, Pollard. With that assumption, is one of these options, 1 or 2, more appropriate?
I can start. I think in this case is both. Again, both. There's no right or wrong answer. I think option 2 allows us to take a closer look to tie this effort with the general plan update. So for that reason, it is more, you're getting a little bit more a customized approach that is appropriate for Los Gatos. Rather than the state goal, nothing is wrong with that, but that is really the state set that threshold for all agencies to consider. And then the state has done its analysis and concluded it's reasonable, but the state didn't go into the detail, say, is this appropriate for Los Gatos versus whether this is appropriate to San Jose, and we are very different. Hope that answers your question.
Well, I'm going to follow up. First of all, the staff recommendation is option number 2, and quite frankly, I haven't heard anything that dissuades me from saying that could be a better one. But where I am having my challenge is if one of you or somebody can just say, number 2 differs from number 1 because. I need it simply.
So let me try and just reframe it a little bit for you. So for the camera, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. Option 1 takes the state number. The state has said 15% is a good number. And so you cities and towns can accept that 15% and go with it. There's substantial evidence that the state has already provided. You're good to go. So choose the 15% if you want to. And the state will support it. All of what OPR has provided supports it, and that's one of our options, and it's a good option. We could take that. The challenge with the 15% for the Los Gatos context is going to be a difficult number to achieve. The reason we talk through all these items on how you get to the number, and some of them are easy, the local project-specific TDM, adding bike racks to a project is really easy. We can make that happen. But it's not going to get us very much towards that 15%. It's going to be a minuscule amount. But some of the bigger regional efforts can. Unfortunately, we don't have those regional things in Los Gatos. We don't have a transit center that we can rely on to get there. So we don't have that as an option. So at this point, if you look at what we have an option of and what we don't, we're probably going to be down in the single-digit numbers versus in the double-digit numbers in what we can possibly achieve on our projects. So that's on option number 1, why the 15% number is there. So given that we're not going to be able to, if you make that assumption, take that leap with me that we can't get to the 15% number, then what other things can we do? We can take a deep dive into what our numbers are going to be, do that evaluation, find out what is achievable for Los Gatos, and set that as our threshold. So maybe it's 9%, maybe it's 2%. We don't know. We won't know until we do the evaluation, and we're not asking you to make that decision tonight. But when we look at all of the things that we can do to contribute to the reduction in VMT, we'll get to some number in that hopefully 0 to 9 range that gives us where we are as a town in the percent reduction. If that helps a little bit. So either way, either path is fine. One of them, option 2, sets the number at where we can get. The other benefit to that is for option 1, if we find through the analysis that we're not going to be able to get there, you have to find overriding considerations when you approve the general plan, and then every subsequent project will need to do a traffic-related EIR. For option 2, you'll have the number if the project is and your general plan will be compliant. And so for every project that comes through that is compliant with that aligns with the general plan, you won't have to do that. It will be considered compliant with the EIR. So those are so in a nutshell, those are the benefits. So that's the streamlining we were talking about in the second one.
All right, but we don't know what our number would be under option 2, where we set the thresholds. You're giving us numbers, but we don't know. I mean, for example, we don't know that we can't do 15%.
But through the analysis that we're going to do for you, what we're asking you tonight is, do you want us to do that analysis and figure that out? And if your answer is yes, we want to go that direction, then we may get to 15%. Staff doesn't believe we will, but we might. Or we come up with a different number, and that's the number we would bring forward to you. It does push us down a little bit of a path that way because we've stepped away from the 15% from a substantial evidence perspective. Now we've got substantial evidence towards a different number, so we're committing ourselves a little bit more in that direction.
And how can we do that given the fact that we know where the general plan has started to go, but we don't know where it is going to go?
And that's the connection with this work that we're talking about tonight with the general plan. So those things will mesh and come together, and those analyses will come together at the conclusion of your general plan land use with our analysis on the data aligning with that land use.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I ask a follow-up
Yes.
question of Director Morley that might help? So if the council wanted to be aspirational and bold, there were a couple of words like that this evening, and we're already kind of on that path towards the general plan, would option 2 allow or provide for that aspiration to be expressed, or would 15% get us there faster?
So option two definitely provides us that opportunity, and it probably provides us that opportunity that with more realistic opportunities for projects that are coming forward in the future, so that they have a number that is not sort of beyond their reach as the projects are being built.
Mr. Rennie?
So I'm still trying to peel the onion and understanding this. And you're saying you think it's difficult to get out of the single digits. I think I'm hearing that we get to calculate miles outside of Los Gatos as long as it starts or ends in Los Gatos. So for example, if we decided we wanted to build teacher housing, we could go look at the teachers that live in that work in our schools here, and we'll find 50%, 70% live in Scotts Valley or Santa Cruz. So I will immediately could see, gee, they're going to drive 2 miles from where we put these teacher housing versus 20 miles from Santa Cruz. That's a huge reduction. So I would think we could get big reduction numbers, not just single teens. Am I misunderstanding something here?
So the reality is you're looking at the Los Gatos. So where are those teachers starting, and where are they going to, and what is the total VMT for the project that you're looking at? And so in the Los Gatos context, I think your numbers are going to continue to be larger. And then Dan, maybe you can talk a little bit about the total VMT and what that might look like.
Yeah, so to just use your example, yes, you would shorten that work trip, but you also start to have to count now that teacher is living in your community, and you have to include all their shopping trips as well. So to really see what that net effect, you have to look at what's on the entire roadway system.
But what's good for the community is they would be doing those shopping trips somewhere else. Okay, we moved it to our community, but we've reduced the total VMT, but we don't get credit for that because it wasn't in our town before.
I think with the size of the projects that we're looking at, I think you're looking at a bigger project, a Google Village type of a project, to make those big changes in the numbers. And we're looking at, in comparison, smaller projects for Los Gatos, where we're not going to move the needle like you might hope from a teacher housing type of a project.
Okay, are we?
Okay.
I'll wait
Okay.
until after public.
Okay, yeah.
Just to follow up on that, so the analysis will tell us that, though, right? As we're aligning the land use that comes out of the general plan with the analysis that we'd be going through in option 2, that those numbers will come together, and those will factor into, if, for instance, Councilmember Rennie, your example is right, and we have a whole bunch of locations that are going to impact the VMT, that would come together with the land use a part of the general plan update.
Okay, I'm going to take a timeout. I don't have any cards for public comment. Does anybody want to talk? Seeing none, public hearing is closed, and we're going to continue our discussion. I'm going to ask my question before I get to Councilwoman Sayoc. Once again, foundational questions. So, Mr. Morley, as I listened to you talk about the distinction between the OPR 15% and the option 2, if you will, customized, the advantage, I was listening to it and I thought, okay, that's just like, sorry you all out there, it's just like default density. So if I'm trying to meet my housing allocation and I zone something at 20 units per acre, I've reached a default density that the state accepts that, like, okay, great, you've done that. So, but with the vehicle miles traveled, the state has said, we've done all the work to establish the substantial evidence to support the 15% below baseline reduction. You don't have to do it again. So it's not, Ms. Pravetti, am I right about that?
You are correct about that.
All right, so the difference is I'm accepting the state work, if you will, and the 15% minus, and saying, great, I'm going to go with that. And what staff is saying is, well, that's fine, you can do that, and the advantages are it's done. Or you can say, Los Gatos, you have a long way to go before you get to the 15%. And so you should do your own analysis to build the substantial evidence before you set something, right?
That's correct.
And so that's the question that you're asking us tonight. Do you want to do the customized approach, or do you want to take the package deal from the state? And then if we say customized deal, you go do the research, you come back and you say, here's what we think is realistic. Great.
That's correct. And it still leaves, the customized still leaves the opportunities for stretch goals. So if that's what you want to achieve when the numbers come back, you'll still have that opportunity. The advantage will be that if you're far off with the 15% number, with the default number, a lot of your projects are going to come through and you're going to have to find overriding considerations in order to approve them. Whereas with a number that's more aligned with the local context, the projects may be able to achieve that, and it may be within their reach to be able to hit your stretch numbers and actually do some good improvements versus just defaulting to overriding considerations.
Okay, I have two more. The question I had while you were talking about the coordination with the general plan update is that, as I understand it, we've got to get our VMT policy, if you will, in place by July 2020. And I can't imagine that our general plan update is going to be matching July 2020. So how do we deal with that?
So we are in the process, as I mentioned earlier, of going through the land use alternative. The General Plan Advisory Committee has made a recommendation. Planning Commission will consider it next week, and we're hopeful that we can bring that to the Town Council for its consideration. There still are a lot of details that we need to work out in terms of the general plan, but at least we would have a framework of what is our goal. And I think as we work through it, the direction that we're hearing from our community task force with planning commissioners and council members engaged is that there is an interest in putting density in the right place, doing more mixed use in the right place, and then allowing more gentle density town-wide through duplexes within an existing house footprint, et cetera. So there are a variety of mechanisms that we can start to analyze as we continue to move forward. I think our bigger challenge is really in terms of the mobility element of the general plan and what are the realistic investments that we can anticipate, because I would imagine we wouldn't essentially count every shopping trip necessarily as a car trip, but we would hope that some folks would be walking or cycling to do their shopping. And so we would want to make sure that the transportation side is matching where the land use is going in terms of where the future for Los Gatos would be. But I think the way we're going now, I think we've made really good progress, and if in April we're able to bring back, for example, if council chooses option 2, we would hope that maybe by the April timeframe we'd actually have some metrics and some data for your consideration. And then if that was acceptable, then we'd be able to round out the policy and finish the guidelines, et cetera. Which would give us time then to get going in a serious matter on the VMT analysis that's going to be needed for the general plan update. So I think we're in pretty good shape, and I allow staff to elaborate if I've misspoken.
No, thank you. That's a really good explanation. Thank you. But so no one sees any consistency or conflict in moving forward with those simultaneously?
I think we're headed in the right direction with moving forward. It is a tight schedule, and we're working hard to keep everything aligned. But at this point, we're on task to get there.
Okay. And my final question: if I were interested in the customized version, which is option 2, but I don't want to sit back and say we're a low-density, car-centric community and we can't do anything. I'd rather see us actually try to do something. If that were my goal, is there some compromise position between the two, or is there at least a target number that the council can give you in doing your customized calculations and say, we'd like to get to 10%, or we'd like to get to 5% minimum. Can you bring us back what that looks like? Or what would 5% look like? What would 10% look like? What would 15% look like? Are you able to do something like that if the council, or at least I, for my question, wants to be able to have a target that is something other than we'll customize it to what we have today? Because I want to plan to get to something different, and if I don't acknowledge that maybe there's going to be something different, and I go with the status quo, then I'm getting nowhere. So how would I figure out that compromise target?
So what I'm hearing is you're looking for some of those stretch opportunities, and So the analysis is math, right? So we'll bring back what the math says, and we'll provide what the opportunities on the stretch side are. So you'll have the number within a small range to be able to well, you can choose the number you want, but having substantial evidence is important. So we'll provide you with what the math says and what the stretch numbers are for you. In terms of providing us guidance, I don't think that's headed in the right direction. I think letting the calculations play out and then looking to increase that a little bit for a stretch goal is probably the direction that we would advise.
Ms. Sayak,
Yeah,
question? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Thank you. If I can add, option 2 allows us to look at the mitigation actions at the program level, at the townwide level. That's where the stretch. So instead of doing the project by project mitigation, like a sidewalk or a couple blocks of bike lane, we're looking at a package of improvements that will really start to make a difference. So I think that's where the strength of option 2, because it allows you to look at the general plan level, allows you to look at some of the programs that allows us to make some difference rather than at the project by project basis.
So projects along that line might be a local shuttle that that a development contributes to, and so now instead of taking a project level mitigation, you're taking that and expanding it town-wide, and it's benefiting the town, so you're getting more bang for your buck. And you can scale that, right? So it could go, instead of a town-wide, it could be into a regional pot of funds that's used for regional transit. That takes it away from local control, but still achieves that regional VMT reduction.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sayak.
Actually, you asked the same questions I was going to, and I'm comfortable with the information given.
Well, let's see if there's any other questions. Mr. Rennie, and no, Vice Mayor, you do not have your finger up. Oh, okay. Well, Mr. Rennie, you first, and then Vice Mayor.
Okay, so I think it's a little bit of a question, but I'll say I'm definitely thinking option 2 is better. The mayor, some of the things she said made me realize what I really want is some analysis of how how we would get to a goal before we set a goal. That's why I think the first option's not really appropriate, because I don't want to set a goal and have no idea how you get there. I'd like to understand something about if you pull this lever, how much it does, and so forth. And so it does get to a little bit of a question now. I had sent staff an email when I read this report about an analysis of different VMTs in the town, and I was thinking at the time this had to be very town-centric. We didn't get to count going out of, but I think it might still be useful to have, for us to understand what is the breakdown of VMTs in the town, so that we know, what policies or thresholds or so forth would have the biggest effect. And I had sent some examples of, okay, what's our VMT for trips that go to school and back, for example? What's our VMT for trips that leave our city and go to work? What's VMT for trips that come from outside the city to work here? What's the VMT for trips for people that come to shop or eat here? What's the VMT for trips for people that start here but they go somewhere else to shop or eat? And I had sort of been sarcastically said, well, if we find that there's more VMT for people coming into our town to eat and shop, maybe we should shut down our downtown so we could reduce VMT. Clearly we don't want to do that. We need to balance our goals. But maybe my question is, does that make sense? Is that doable, that we could get some kind of breakdown of what are the different pieces of the VMT, so that we could then think about policies? And, for example, school, in my mind, is the most obvious, because we know there's a lot of traffic with school, but I don't know how big it is. But, our policies might say something like anything within walking distance radius of a school, if that's half mile or whatever, should be a family-oriented development. Doesn't make any sense to build a whole bunch of 600 square foot units, for example. They're not very family-oriented. I'm just making stuff up, but I'm trying to think forward to what kinds of policies might we have, and then back it up into what analysis do we need to do so we can think of what those policies might be.
Yes, thank you for your questions. And staff thinks, yes, agreed, having the details of what type of VMT associated with what type of troops, those will be helpful. It's going to take us some time to get the information. We can roll the information into our analysis. But the VMT, the numbers you see here, they do account for most of the trips, most of the VMTs. So the trips from home to work, from home to school, and vice versa, those are the biggest trips, the biggest VMT generating trips, as opposed to the ones going shopping versus the one going to medical reasons. So just put a relative scale to that, but we will actually go into that level of detail when we come back to you with the information.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor, before I go to you, I just want to clarify. Mr. Rennie's questions am I correct in thinking that they go to metrics and that right now we're just talking about a threshold? I mean, when we get to the
That's
point
a
where
good-
we're actually doing methodology and metrics,
It actually goes into
then
both.
we'll talk about that. But right now we're just doing doing the analysis to get to our threshold of impact, no impact, is what we're doing right now.
You're correct. You're correct.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I think this discussion amongst the council members and with staff was very, very helpful, so thank you all. With that in mind, I'm going to move that we approve option 2 to set thresholds consistent with the general plan, future year vehicle mile travel VMT projections, adding that when the staff comes back to us with its numbers, processes, that it stretch those numbers to give us as many opportunities as possible, consistent with, of course, the substantial evidence mandate.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion. With exactly that, the stretch goals, I think, are important to all of us. And if we could enumerate how we get to that and then fold that into sustainability elements in our general plan, I think that would tie the two documents well together.
Okay, other comments or questions before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Fair and Peers. Thank you, staff, Ms. Smith, Mr. Morley. Thank you very much. Very informative. Oh, you were officially adjourned.